Welcome to The Change, a podcast about the changes in life that shake, break, and make us. I'm Laura, a 45-year-old writer, podcaster, and mum who has until recently always loved change.
And I'm Kathy, a 53-year-old writer, podcaster, and mum, and change is actually my kryptonite. We acknowledge the traditional owners of country throughout Australia on which this podcast is recorded and recognise the continuing connections to lands, waters and communities.
We pay our respects to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander cultures and elders past and present.
The Season 2 partner of The Change is Olivio Wellness Skincare, hydrating natural skincare for the over 40s.
Keep listening to the end of this episode for a discount code for your next order of Olivio Wellness products.
Hey Laura.
Hey Kathy, how are you?
Yeah, I'm pretty good.
Pretty good. Tell us who is on The Change today.
We have Trish Bolton. She's an award-winning writer based in Melbourne. She has a diploma of professional writing and editing from RMIT. Her writing has been published across a variety of publications, including The Age, Sydney Morning Herald, Canberra Times. She has been a media advisor to the federal leader of a political party, worked in policy and research in women's health, lectured in media and communications at Swinburne, and finally, she had her debut novel, Whenever You're Ready, which you talked about a few weeks ago.
Such a good book. Yeah.
And that was published this year in her 60s. So let's welcome Trish.
Hello, Trish. Welcome to The Change.
Hi, Laura. Hi, Kathy. It's lovely to be here. Thank you for the invitation.
It's great to have you here. So, Trish, you had your first novel published in your 60s. Has this writing, publishing, being a novelist dream always been featured in your life? And what was the process and path you took to get it done?
Well, I can't say that I really dreamt of being a novelist, and I know a lot of writers do. But I did dream of being a writer, and I was always a big reader. And I could read virtually when I went to school. And I had read Little Women, and I loved the character Little Jo. And she was a writer, she was a journalist. And that's what I sort of thought that I would love to be, a writer. But I didn't really refine it in any way. I didn't think about it I never really thought about being a novelist, even when I was older. So when I was at school, I discovered I was really good at English. I was good at essay writing. And I was told that I could be a writer by a high school teacher. I still didn't really think about being a novelist, though I was still a big reader then. And I entered a competition for a cadetship with The Age. And it was a competition. It was a general knowledge test, a piece of writing. It was for a boy and a girl. I entered it without ever thinking that I'd get anywhere. I did. I was called in for a very short interview, and I was the girl that won the cadetship. But I was so terrified. I was so surprised and quite terrified. What on earth would that mean? And I was working then in a typing pool. And of course, I look back at that and think, how foolish. But I didn't take up the opportunity, and I always regretted it. And then I went on to university as a mature age student, and I studied media and communications, thinking that might be a way into journalism. And I was doing quite a lot of freelance writing by then and getting published in various publications, particularly in The Age, actually. Things sort of went a bit full circle. And but it wasn't sort of really satisfying me after a few years. And I did do that freelance writing for about 20 years on and off.
Wow.
And I thought I just wanted to do something different. I wasn't quite sure what. And then I started thinking about novel while I was actually doing a PhD, and I was actually lecturing in media and communications by then. Also, strangely enough, teaching master's students journalism subjects, though I hadn't really officially studied journalism myself. So I was doing my PhD and finding that very demanding and the work very demanding. And I became quite ill. I had breast cancer, and that just gave me pause to think about what I wanted to do with the rest of my life. And I didn't immediately go and study writing or novel writing. It took me about 2 years, and I eventually resigned from my position at the university and went and studied creative writing at RMIT. So that was a huge turning point for me.
And had you had, going from writing nonfiction to fiction, had you had kind of characters in your mind along the way, or, ideas for novels, or is this something that you came to later in life?
It took a little while to come to that. I mean, it was 10 years from really when I went to RMIT to getting my first novel published. I thought that I'd be able to transfer my skills of nonfiction writing over to fiction, and that didn't quite work out. So I found it was a very different way of writing. But I really enjoyed it because it opened up whole new possibilities, a whole sort of emotional landscape that I couldn't really write about in nonfiction writing, or not the sort of nonfiction writing I was doing anyway.
And what can I ask about, sorry, Trish, about your nonfiction writing? And I do have a little question about the cadetship too. Do you think you didn't take it because it was confidence, it was a stage of life? Why didn't you take it? And then also, what did you used to write nonfiction about? What were your freelance writing about?
Yeah, it was really confidence, I think,
Okay.
and just a sort of lack of sophistication and experience. I was only 16,
Goodness,
so I was quite young.
Yeah.
And it was in those days when you didn't have to go and do a journalism degree. You did a cadetship and you learned on the job. So I really just didn't have any experience of people working in those sorts of fields. I didn't know anyone who'd been to university. I was a very much working class background. So it seemed quite overwhelming to me, and I didn't. That's really why I didn't take up the opportunity.
Yeah,
and I have said before that my mother cried for 3 days, but I think she actually cried for 3 weeks.
Oh,
so
God.
she was very, very disappointed. But I just really couldn't see myself doing anything like that. I had a job; it seemed safe and comfortable, and I just didn't take that position. Yeah, it's hard to understand, I think, looking back, but this was in the sort of 60s. Times are very different then too.
Yeah, because I imagine also, well, I'm not sure, my auntie and mother, who are a little bit older than you, they worked in the in the 60s, but my auntie was the first Australian public service woman, sorry, when she got married. So it was, I think she got married in 1969, to be allowed to keep her job after getting married. So up until then, and even post then, I think a lot of women still, they had to leave work when they got jobs. So as much as I guess, yeah, I'm like Laura going, oh my goodness, why didn't you take that opportunity? But potentially you would have had to have given the opportunity up if you got married, or had children. If you were allowed to stay after you got married, definitely when you had children, it would have been a fight to have kept hold of the position. So I can understand it.
That's really that's really interesting because I do remember one of my friends worked for an insurance company as a secretary, we were called in those days. And when she got married, she was asked to leave. And the public service, I think, and there was a name for it too. There was a name for once you got married, that you actually had to leave your position. So that was right up into the 60s. And I think too, my experience was that clever girls went on to be nurses and teachers, and you didn't think about your career in the long term. You thought about it. I did anyway, and I'm sure not all girls did, but you thought about it until you got married. So perhaps not perhaps, but you certainly didn't put the sort of effort in or think in terms of long-term careers, and so put the work into that. So it was very different.
Different times. Yeah.
And I guess that, for me, being born in the 70s, so I'm a bit younger than you and obviously younger than my mother, but being born in the 70s and being that generation of women and girls who were told, you have to go to university, you have to get a degree, you have to have a career, you have to have children. And it was just for us, for my generation, I can I mean, obviously I can't speak for everybody of my generation, but it kind of felt a bit overwhelming that all of a sudden we had this all put on our shoulders. And it is a little bit like, well, we fought for you to have those rights so that you could keep your job after you got married, so you could keep your career after you had children. So like there was like this impetus of go off and get a career and don't give it up and do all of those things. And yeah, so I guess looking back, I can definitely understand that, a cadetship for you at that point in your life, as much as Laura and I look at it and go, oh my goodness, why? Because we were that bit further down.
Yeah.
For us at that point, it could have been a career. We wouldn't have had to have given it up, but potentially for you, go into it for a short period of time and then had to have given it up anyway.
I think I would have been the same at 16, actually. I would never have had the confidence to take a cadetship with a newspaper. I was I had such low confidence at that age. And I think even though we grew up in a different time, and yes, in theory, we had, you should go to university. You look at the movies on the 90s and the kind of culture at the time, it was still very like male, males ran the world, and we were still kind of, so I think now, yes, it's if this generation that our kids, great. I hope that they have that confidence of the women to take all the opportunities they can when they come to them. I think that it has changed a great deal, and I'm glad that it has. But yes, I completely understand why you didn't. Oh, I did want to ask about your nonfiction too, and what you were writing about during that time. Yeah.
Yeah, I did a lot of opinion pieces. And I was quite interested in that sort of writing. And I was studying media, and I was really interested in the representation of women. So I was interested in thinking about women of much younger age then and how they were represented in the media. I was quite interested in politics in general, but I taught sort of at the intersection of media and politics at university. But mostly I wrote about women. So I'd write about things like I'd write about domestic violence, I'd write about homelessness, feminist, issues that sort of interested feminists. So, and I did do features as well. And I also wrote quite a lot of analysis of media, of media ownership and so forth. That really interested me too. But I just found it wasn't sort of satisfying after a certain period of time, that I wanted to write about different things, and I wanted to write in a different way.
And now you've got your first book out. Yes. And did you send it to, because I read in the acknowledgements, you sent it and it sat in the slush pile for a little while. Is that correct? The publishers? Yeah. Okay.
Oh, I was so determined not to have this manuscript in a slush pile anywhere, because my previous manuscript, although it won a lot of different unpublished awards, I wasn't able to get it published. And it sat in a lot of slush piles, and I thought, no, I'm not doing that this time. So I sought out all these names that I thought of people I could submit to, and then I went to Email Finder and I tried to find emails for people so it would go directly to the right person. And when it went to Eleanor Unwin, who was ultimately my publisher, I did actually send it to someone whose name I'd seen many times in acknowledgements, but she told me, no, Trish, I'm the wrong person and you need to send it to this person. And that person ended up being the person who managed the slush pile.
No.
Yeah, so I was like, oh, no. And anyway, but I did. And I quite cheekily asked if I could submit the entire manuscript instead of the 3 chapters that they normally asked for. And I'd had some lovely words said by a mentor that was known to Eleanor Unwin. And I think that might have got me through, because they said, yes, okay, send us the full manuscript. And I inquired very impatiently, I think about 6 weeks later, and they said, if you could just wait a couple of weeks. And I thought it was quite unusual. No one had said that to me before, but I didn't actually realise it, but it was actually being taken to acquisitions by, I believe, Jane Palfreyman. And probably if I'd known, I would have been, a wreck for that fortnight. So it's good that I didn't know. And then I got the offer of publication. And a day or two later, I got another offer of publication, which I was already with Eleanor Unwin and very thrilled to be with them too.
Very exciting. Yeah. A writer's dream.
No, the writer's dream is the auction.
Oh, right. Okay.
Where they auction off the manuscript.
Oh,
It
yes.
happens very occasionally when it doesn't make headlines. Yes.
Oh, wow.
Ah.
Yeah, that's where the big bucks come in, I guess.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
Fame and fortune.
So, Trish, we often say that women in midlife and beyond are much more interesting than their younger sisters because we have lived. Why do you think so little literature has, until quite recently, focused on lives of older women?
Yeah, I think it's just a reflection of the broader culture that
Mhm.
older women become more invisible as they age. Um, they're less seen, they're less heard. And I think that's changing. Perhaps it's the boomer generation. I'm not sure. We're blamed for a lot of things. Perhaps we can be blamed for this as well.
Mhm.
I think where we did see women in literature, they were they were always maternal figures. They were
Mhm.
grandmothers or perhaps mothers. They were nurturers, and we just didn't see older women doing or living the sorts of lives that older women do. We're just a stereotype. So if you do see representations of women in the media, older women in the media, it's usually they're very frail, they're pushing a frame, they're in a
Mhm.
nursing home, they're a grandmother, they're someone whose life is almost over. You rarely see older women, I think, riding a bicycle or at a protest or at a festival. Though if you do look at festivals, it's a sea of grey hair, because that's who goes to book festivals and
Mm.
to theatre and, to cinema, arguably. So, yeah, I just think it's just representative of the broader culture that older women have not been seen and have not been heard. And I think that is changing quite a lot in literature too. Even when I first had the idea for this novel, that I wanted to write about older women and I really wanted to push against the stereotypes of frail and aged and show these women having, full lives and also lives that they're still trying to manage, with all the
Yep.
emotional complications that we all have in life. There weren't that many writers writing about older women writing about older women, but there are now. There's just such an influx.
Mm.
And I think you may have mentioned Jane Tara's book, Tilda is
Mhm.
Visible. There's also Annie de Michaud, Audrey's Gone AWOL, which is a really lovely read, and Joanna Nell. So many other writers are writing about older
Is
women.
Joanna Null's book, Mrs. Winterbottom Takes a Gap
Mm,
Year? Yeah,
yes.
I've started it. It's honestly, I'm such a terrible reader at the moment. I have all these books started and chapters. I'm partway through all of these books about older women becoming visible or taking gap years because,
I love it.
that's
Yeah.
well, that's where I'm heading, sort of thing. So I don't want to read about the 20-year-old up and coming
Scarlet
magazine
or
exec because that's not me anymore. Like I can't aspire to be a 20-year-old magazine exec, but I can aspire to, aging disgracefully or aging visibly or whatever it is.
aging
And
well.
yeah, aging well and
Mm.
just having fun as I get older and yeah, so I mean, I'm a long way through Mrs. Winterbottom, and it is a fabulous read, that one as well. But yeah, it's
Yeah, she's a
it's
very lovely
interesting.
writer. Yeah, she's a very
Yeah,
lovely writer. Yeah.
it is. It is really interesting. Do you think that we also write about what we know? So if I was to start writing now, I know what it is to have been 20, 30, 40, but I don't know what it is to be older. So it's less familiar for me to write about. So it's a little bit harder, I guess, for me to do that writing. Whereas good writers can get into that space and irrespective of what age they are.
Yeah, I mean, one of the pieces of advice writers are given, especially debut writers or early writers, is to write what you know.
Hmm.
Uh, and that does come more naturally. But of course, it is also great to write what you don't know.
Hmm.
But I think, I'm obviously writing what I know because I'm in that sort of slightly younger, but I'm in that age group of the women that I'm writing about. But I just think that I think it's very hard to write about older age unless you are of that age.
Mm-hmm.
You can do all the research you like, but it quite sneaks up on you. For me, it was sort of in my late 50s, I think, that I started looking back quite a lot and started looking at the patterns of my life quite a lot, patterns that I hadn't seen before. And it was quite revealing. And I did ruminate quite a lot. So, and I think those sort of experiences and then into your 60s, I just really think you have to be that age. You can think about it, you can imagine, but because it's been such an experience for me, an experience I hadn't really anticipated, and the way that you are sometimes treated too, I hadn't really anticipated that. So I think for me, you have to be around this age to write about this age.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. I remember getting quite cranky looking at, well, it's slightly different, but seeing younger women in their 20s talk about how women in their 40s should look or shouldn't look, or, making comment on something they just really just don't understand yet, and I think that's kind of true, isn't it? You just have to have lived it to go, well, to make genuine, authentic comment on it. It's not fair.
It's a little bit like, parenting writers who are not parents, and they tell you how you should do things, and you kind of think, come back to me when you've got a baby and we'll discuss actually how that should list actually works out for you. Now, for some people, that should list works out perfectly exactly the way they want it to. But for others...
Lucky them.
Yeah. It certainly didn't for me. So, yeah.
On the subject of aging, a slight side story, but this morning I was at my son, he's only 7, but he's reading at school, and this little boy I was reading with, so sweet, and he was talking about his grandma and how she was about to go on an adventure and how she loves to go on adventures. And I thought, that's cool. I want to be that grandma going on adventures. He was just so proud of his nan off on another Northern Territory camping expedition. That was very cute.
Fantastic.
Yeah. Sort of on the same train of thought, I would love to talk about your characters in Whenever You're Ready, which is obviously your debut novel. Lizzie, Alice, Claire, and Margot, they were all such well-rounded, real characters. So thank you very much for creating them and bringing them to life. Especially Lizzie, Alice, and Claire, they're all in their mid-70s in the storyline. And I was wondering, did kind of real-life events or people inspire you to create them? And if so, how? And have you spoken to those people? Do they know that they are inspirations?
I certainly didn't intentionally, but I think subconsciously your life experience, the places that you've worked in, the work that you've done, the relationships that you've had will, make themselves, they will appear on the page when you least expect it. And sometimes you do sit back and go, oh my goodness, where did that come from? And I have thought too that the characters that I wrote are the best and worst of me. They've got some of my strengths and some of my frailties, but they are made up, overwhelmingly made up. I can't say that any of them are based on anyone that I know or necessarily myself. But so the little boy Tom, though, does come from my childhood.
Okay.
Tom, I think it's not from the first chapter that
Yes.
Tom actually dies when he's very young. And there was a little boy that lived across the road from me, and he was an only child, and he was apparently the son of, his parents are supposed to be older. What older meant in those days, I have no idea. Maybe they were just in their 30s, but perhaps 40s. And they absolutely adored this little boy. And we all played with him in those days. You all just played in the streets and around the neighbourhood. Quite wild, really, compared to today. And he was very much a part of my childhood. And he was about 7 or 8, and he died in his sleep.
Oh.
So it was an older child. It wasn't a cot death, but it was like a cot death. And, of course, the parents could never have any more children. He was their only child. And there was such a grief to that. And I was too young to really understand. I think I might have been 10 or 11. And it's always stayed with me, and the terrible grief of that mother. And the one scene that I taught that is from real life is that mother carried or tied his football jumper around her waist and couldn't sort of let it go. And so that's where that story came from. Otherwise, yes, they're sort of imagined characters. I wanted them to be strong, independent women. I wanted them to push against the stereotype. I wanted them to be perhaps even difficult, independent, perhaps even difficult, fallible, and hopefully relatable, and perhaps even lovable. I did have things that I wanted to discuss in relation to these women. I wanted to think about, I just didn't think I could write about older women without talking about things like homelessness and perhaps domestic violence. So, but I didn't really set out with any agendas. I just wrote, and of course, when you get past the first few draft stage, you go in there and you sort of finesse. But I didn't specifically have agendas, but I wanted to write about older women's lives. I wanted to write about the darker themes. I also wanted to approach mortality, and I wanted to think about things like if you live a good life, then why not think about a good death as well?
Yeah, you do that so beautifully at the beginning. And this is not a spoiler, but Claire is one of the main characters throughout the book, but she actually dies at the start of the book. And Lizzie and Alice are friends, and they obviously talk. Their relationships and their friendship with Claire is part of the main theme. And friendship is such a key theme for so many women, I think. And I think that exploring their friendship and their ups and their downs over the years it's just a beautiful part of the book. And they could have been really any age in that sense, but their experience and their wisdom, their hopes, and I just loved that they had such interesting lives and that you really explored that so much depth. And I loved it. It was a great read. And yes, obviously recommend it. We've already recommended the book, but
it does all sound rather grim, doesn't it? But I
not at all.
in a way.
No,
But I wanted.
I have started reading it, and even though, it sounds grim, it's actually not. And I think I'm 2 or 3 chapters in, and both of those spoilers have already happened.
Yes.
To where I'm up to, and it's really lovely, just seeing the depth that's happening and what will evolve from that. Like, that's very exciting to sort of, I'm like, it was exactly as Laura described it to me. It's like you want to read more and more. And so I'm going away soon. So I have about 3 books, and I'm hoping to finish all of them while I'm away.
Yes, I wanted to write about the darker themes and the realities, but I did want to have I really wanted to do it also with a light touch, so that I just didn't leave the reader chapters and chapters of more difficult events, more difficult, darker stories. So I wanted to lift the reader out of that and give you a little break and take a little breath. And have a little bit of fun with it too, especially with my character Alice. So although she was facing
I loved her.
lots of issues, she was positive and optimistic, and she provided, I think, the sort of lighter side of the story as well.
Yeah, I love that she kind of has a whole new phase of life. That's great. I love that they had hopes and visions for their futures that, of course they should as women of any age, but I love that especially.
And I think it's important to explore those darker themes in life, because they're not themes, they're actually reality for a lot of people. And, we often like to skirt around them rather than have those difficult conversations. And aging itself can bring with it such a sense of grief for a life that is already lived. That growing awareness that what's happened is stretching out longer than what is going to come in the future. What's your general approach to dealing with that inevitability of aging?
I think it's something that we don't really talk about very much, and that's why fiction is a great place to explore it. I think that there is a grief as you get older. There is, of course, joy, and I don't want to paint old age as, this grief-stricken place, because it just isn't.
No.
But there are griefs, and I think they need to be acknowledged, because I think it's important for us to know what older people are carrying around as well. To recognise that and to acknowledge it. So the older you get, of course, the more loss you experience. I guess it starts with your grandparents and eventually your parents. And then along the way, as you get older, you will lose friends. I've actually been very fortunate, and that hasn't happened to me. But the more life you experience, the more loss you're going to experience. And I think there's also a grief for the different versions of you. So for me, I think of perhaps that very conscientious little girl, the quite confused teenager, the mother who tried very hard, perhaps didn't always get it right. So you grieve for those different versions of yourself, and you feel for those different versions of yourself too. And although they're like other people and their other lives, they are still you, and you still have much of that past within you. So you don't change all that much. So yeah, and there's, as I'm sort of getting older too, I sort of have quite a grief for the planet as well, for the planet that we're leaving behind, for our children, and that my generation, just did such a bad job of things. There's also that grief for your pets, all the pets that you've lost along the way.
Yes.
If you've ever lost a pet and you adore that pet, I know I've lost a few pets in the last 4 or 5 years, and that's been really quite, it's had quite a long-lasting sort of effect on you. Then there's sort of regrets, I think, of perhaps dreams and hopes that were unfulfilled. Say perhaps the promise that you thought you perhaps had that you didn't fulfill. I'm not necessarily just speaking about myself, but in general, things that people have said to me. There are events in your life, perhaps a divorce and major life-changing events that you sort of look back. And I think there are also regrets for things that you can't change now. Perhaps a sorry that you didn't say to someone, and it's too late to say that sorry to someone. And the writer George Saunders talks about looking back on his life, and I think we're about the same age. And he says what he regrets most are the failures of kindness. And I think that's what I most regret in myself. And we can all look back and see those moments, even if they're a very long time ago, and wish perhaps you'd behaved differently, had more empathy. So I've sort of given you a long list there, haven't I?
I think it's very reflective, isn't it? And yeah, it's all true.
Yeah, and it certainly, that list says a lot of things that we can potentially tick off earlier, like that, to try and avoid those senses of regret. If there's a sorry that you need to say, or those moments. But apart, for us that are younger, with that, looking forward, try not to leave it with regret, I guess. But yeah, it's also life, right? And
it's life, and we're all
can't
human,
get it right.
and we're all going and going to make mistakes. So it's finding that balance. So I think it's finding that balance between looking back and also looking forward. And so having as rich a life as you can have, I suppose. And for me, that's a creative life. But that's different for everyone. And I think you have to come to that place of forgiveness too, if, there are regrets when you look back over a long life. And I think the other thing too that older people are facing, of course, is their mortality. And that's quite a thing. I mean, we're all going to that place. But you do grow an acceptance of that. The older you get, the more you sort of accept it, because you think about it more than you do, of course, when you're in your 40s or in your 30s or your 50s. So there is a growing acceptance of your mortality. But these are things that older people carry around. But generally, they're not going to talk about them with you. it's almost like this little private world, and I wanted to open up that world to say that this is the world for older people.
Yeah, and everyone could really do with perhaps showing a little bit more empathy and kindness when dealing with everyone. But I think it is something that, because older people and women in particular have been absent from literature and culture generally, it's not something that has been discussed enough. So I think it is good when people like you come along and do that, so that it does give us a chance to have these conversations and say, yeah, just look, it's hard, but it also can be fun too, which I think is really important, as you have said, especially through the character like of Alice, who is, she's still out there having a good time and learning and doing new things in her 70s, which is just really important. And I guess, if it's okay, this brings me to the next question, which is about your future. And are there any changes you still want to make professionally or personally?
Well, I would like to go back and do that PhD that I started a very long time ago, when I became unwell and sort of gave that up. Whether I do or not, I don't know. But that's something I always wished I'd finish my PhD. I would like to write another novel or novels, one or two more, I suppose, and to be the best writer I can be, to write something that's sort of really meaningful. And I'll still push against the stereotypes, I suppose, in my personal life and in my writing. And if there's one thing I'd really like to do that I'm absolutely hopeless at, but I'm trying very hard, is meditation.
Okay.
I can't
is
last
hard.
more than about 15 minutes. And my partner
15
is
minutes
a
is...
daily meditator, and he's half an hour, and he would go longer if he could. He'll get up very early every morning to meditate, and I really do admire it, and I see the benefits of it. So that's something I would really like to master, but I probably won't. I've got that very busy mind, and anyway.
15 minutes better than nothing.
Yeah, that's right. That sounds good to me. I think I'd struggle with 2.
Yeah. That probably brings us to nearly to the end. And here we are with our last question that we ask everybody, regardless of their age. What are your feelings towards perimenopause or the menopause, or do you have any advice for younger women?
Well, when I heard about perimenopause, all I could think of was, it's got a name. Oh my goodness, this thing that I went through in my 40s, which was really awful. Physically, emotionally, it was such an awful experience. It didn't have a name. No one talked about it. You just sort of dealt with it. And it was in those years leading up to menopause. So, yes, I think there needs to be much more research into it. I think there needs to be much more support of women, and really much more support of women in general, because our bodies, we have children, pregnancies, children, breastfeeding, menstruation, menopause, perimenopause. I mean, our bodies do a lot, and I think that really needs to be acknowledged. So, yes, I was really sort of relieved to think that it had a name and I hadn't just been imagining it. And menopause, well, I went into menopause pretty much overnight because of treatment that I was having for my breast cancer. I never, ever regretted not having my periods. That was just such a relief to me. I know some women feel that that's a loss. I certainly didn't feel that. And I wasn't able to take HRT, because, because of my situation. So I did experience quite a dramatic, and it was quite an onslaught when I went into menopause, but I did get through it. So what did you ask me what my advice was to younger women?
Yeah. If you have any.
I would say, I know she's often quoted, Mary Oliver, but I would say, stop and ask yourself what you do want to do with your one wild and precious life. It's a question I never asked myself. Don't just let life take you along with it. Decide what you really want from life for yourself. And I also think, don't be hemmed in by social and gender stereotypes. Live the life you want to live and be the person that you really want to be. For me, I would say, if I'd asked myself that question, I would have wanted a creative life, but I didn't take those opportunities, or perhaps there weren't those opportunities. But I think for younger women today, there are many more options. And I mean, there are still limitations, I know, but there are many more options. And finally, I think look to somebody who you really admire, an older woman you really admire, and look to her as a sort of a role model.
Trish, I love it. Thank you so much. No, that was excellent advice. I think creativity in life is always good advice, and and making sure you take a moment to really think about what you want. I mean, never too late to do that.
Oh my gosh. So much to take away from that chat.
Yep. Love Trish and hearing her experiences. She's a woman in her 60s just doing brilliant stuff, living her dream in the sense that she's finally published her first novel. And I love to see it. I love to see women of any age, living their dream. But I think it's really great that we celebrate women doing these things later in life. All these 30 under 30 lists. No, I want to see 70 under 70 or whatever.
Because I think sometimes we feel like we have to cram it all in when we're young. And I guess that's probably an indictment on society, because if we cram it in while we're young, then we can have children and then we can be in that nurturing space. So that's why we have to be super successful before we have kids, and then we're not giving our all to our children. And I'm seeing a lot of that across social media at the moment. A particular woman I follow from the States, she's an astronaut, and she went to space last year. Her name's Kelly. And she's absolutely fabulous. But gosh, she cops a lot of criticism from people who say, why are you a mum if you wanted to do this? And I think that's potentially, that's obviously still stereotypes in society. There's so much has to change for those thoughts and feelings and of society to change. But I feel like that's potentially why we feel like we have to cram it all while we're young and then have children so we can be all in on the children, instead of doing what Kelly is doing and so many other amazing women are doing, which is you can have children and you can have a career if you've chosen the right support network around you and you've made good, you've got a great supportive partner who wants your dreams for you just as much as you want their dreams for them, kind of, you know what I mean? So I think that's why there's that, pressure for women to try and cram it all in when they're young. But you are so right. We have so much to talk about when we're older, and there's so much more interesting things that have happened to us and with us or part of our lives. And one of the key takeaways for me was around the kindness that, where Trish was talking about kindness at the end. And I sort of think sometimes that it's not only kindness to your other people, but also kindness to yourself around things that maybe didn't go quite right in life, or maybe mistakes you've made. And hopefully we get to a point in our lives where we can show ourselves. I mean, I'm pretty good at showing everyone around me a huge amount of kindness and, forgiving their mistakes. But I'm really still very much a work in progress on kindness to myself. And I think that kindness to myself about regrets or mistakes or things that have happened in my life that's really important, so that I can, as I look forward to ending, my life is not ending. Don't take this as that's what I'm saying. But as I'm going forward to live that fulfilled and happy life, showing myself some kindness that I might show to others is also probably important.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, her focus on kindness, empathy. When she talked about the planet as well, I thought, that's something that we all, as we get older, feel much more passionately about when we look around and enjoy nature when we get older, but also, worry about the future of the planet and the environment because we have kids, or we don't, but we have young people in the world that we want to be able to live a long and happy life just as we are currently hoping to. I think what she said about thinking about taking that moment where she quoted, was it Mary Oliver right at the end? You've got one wild and precious life, and it's really important that we take time out of our busy, over-scheduled lives to really think about what we want. And I think it's a good reminder. And Trish, being that few years above us, it's great to have someone like that with wisdom and the experience of life to just make you think, yep, I need to refresh that thought now and again and go, what do I really want? And am I getting what I really want out of life? So important. And it was a great chat.
Yeah. And how to carve what you really want out of life with the life that you have as well.
Yeah. There's no need to blow it up. I don't think that was her message at all. No, that's right. It was just really thinking about it and taking a moment, and the way that she adapted her non-fiction writing, into fiction writing, but sort of thinking about what she really wanted. And I think that's what she's ended up doing, which is fantastic. She's got to crack that meditation if that's what she wants.
Thanks for listening to The Change, a fully independent podcast.
We love the Australian-made, all-natural skincare brand Alivio Wellness, and we know you will too.
Use code THECHANGE at the checkout to receive 20% off your next order. Whether you're seeking inspiration, curious about change, or just here for the great banter, we'd love you to make The Change your new go-to podcast.
And even better, send us your voice notes or questions about change. We'll use them on the show. Email us at changepod2023@gmail.com or DM us on Instagram at _change_pod. Find us wherever you get your podcasts. And don't forget to follow us on Instagram for more on The Change.